And we just want to say thank you, first of all, for the Baltic Dance Platform and the new Baltic Dance Festival. And a special thanks, of course, for the Nordic Council of Ministers office in Lithuania and Latvia for the support. And briefly, I will introduce you to the creative team. Sintijos Siliņos, the choreographer of the rock bottom piece. And Max Shentelevs, the sound artist. And also we have a youth representative from Iceland, Magnus Friedrich Gudrunarsson, and the founder and the head of the Depression Treatment Center, Aušra Mockuviene. We gathered the creative team and the specialists, representatives specialized or working in the field of depression treatment, so that we can have this discussion about the theme more broader outside as well of the dance stage, basically. And I would like to just start, because it's quite late and I know it's been a long day, and just go straight forward with a question for Cynthia. Why this theme, and how did you decide to do the performance or work on this kind of theme, depression? Because it's straightforward, as you read, contemporary dance performance about depression.
Yes. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming to the performance and be here. Answering the question, there was a time in my life when I faced the depression at a closer level. And I was surprised, I would say I was shocked about the state, how person feels and acts in his everyday life. And of course, as a choreographer, I found it interesting how movement and body works at this, being in this state. And then I met in the beginning of 2018 Linda, who is also a dramaturg of the performance and producer, and they encouraged me and said, yes, let's try, although the topic is hard and yeah, in the beginning we didn't know how it will end up. So we started to work, and Linda's task was to, as much as possible, to get information. She met a couple of, I would say, a lot of people, including specialists working in Latvia with treating depression, and also the people who are actually in this state, in this being in depression. And it turned out that actually that's the big deal also in Latvia. And there was a survey in 2014, and it showed that actually every fourth person in Latvia has somehow faced that disease, somehow connected. So it actually, we were surprised that it's a lot of people knows about this disease, but still don't know how to, what's the attitude, how to treat it, how to diagnose it, and then we just collected all the information and started to put it into the creative process.
Once you said as well, this weird thing about it is that in a state of depression, there's not a lot of movement. Actually, you want to be still as possible, just lie in your bed and do nothing. But this is a dance performance. So how did you approach that? How did you actually think about the movement in this context?
Yes, this is true that in depression there is as less movement as is possible. Also, it's hard to talk about. But anyway, we decided to somehow put it into movement language. We worked a lot with metaphors, which you could read also in program in the very beginning. The metaphors was the basic impulse for the work. The funny thing, which I will tell you, that most of the time, I would say the one half of the time, dancers didn't know the topic. We worked only with tasks and metaphors. The reason was that I was afraid that it will be too much emotions involved, but my vision was to more show the process and the processes in which person is going through. So you saw that also we had a plot. We made like separate parts, and we also called them in poetic words, also metaphoric, using metaphors, and that's that's basically the metaphors was the main impulse.
So I have a question for Maxis. The sound was quite an interesting thing, and we heard it before that the people are quite interested. What are those pieces? How did you approach from the beginning for the soundscape for the performance when Cynthia invited you?
Somehow it was really easy working with Cynthia. Maybe it was a good moment to do that. I basically used my archives. I'm doing field recordings, doing phonography. So I used my personal archives and archives of my friends. Martin Boyko, a collector and researcher of burial and lament singing and music, shared with me like years ago his archive of different lament songs from all over the world. And so I had a opportunity to go through the archive, because this is not a type of music I usually listen a lot. So something for me to research as well. So I have tons of records from different countries. So I picked some basically only based on a feeling what is appropriate for soundscape in this case. And also many recordings of these skipping CDs and tape loops, which are analog recordings of my own from very, very long time ago. So I could put many things together, and I was really happy to do that. That's really the way I like to work. And some things definitely were new as well here, composed and arranged especially for the case. So yeah, I think for me the technique was like a polyphony. So it's like a polymedia in this case. In many lines, I'm sort of copying and doubling the motion, but it's not just like a copying. It's like in polyphony, you articulate something with copying and putting it a little bit wrong, a little bit aside. So I would mimic in many times motion with a sound, because it just gives another dimension. And for me, if I approach myself the topic of depression, it's the most essential part is awareness for me, observation. I think in my own experience, that's the only way how a person can deal with this condition is being in a state of observing himself or herself, or what we suppose to be ourselves, from a side. And this method of polyphony gives a sort of also metaphoric or even a technical sort of outer body experience of doubling something and looking at that. So by putting another layer of sound over a layer of emotion, which is a layer over a metaphor or some condition, so we make multi-leveled composition, which gives opportunity of observing it in more details, more deep. So that was basically technique.
Then maybe the question for all of you. Can art or the act of art actually impact or change mental health? What do you think?
First of all, about the performance, it was really terrible to look at it all the time. And I think all of you did a great job. showing how it feels. It felt terrible, really. It was hard to be in here all the time. I felt I don't know, for a month there. Really, I work with people who suffer from depression pretty much every day. And I have experience to be with a person for an hour every week, for a long time. But that felt not for an hour, that felt very long. The feeling was it will never end. It was really hard. And when you're talking about awareness, I think that gives a lot of awareness for people who didn't suffer from depression. But I hope it could give some hope for those who suffer. And I hope also the different forms of art could give the feeling that I'm not alone there.
I think that's a really good word you're using, hope. It's a really important word for people suffering from depression, because it's sort of the first thing that disappears. And that's one of the things that struck me here. There's three words in particular that I really connect with. And it's hope, it's opportunity, and control. And opportunity maybe wasn't a big factor here, but the complete lack of hope and the complete lack of control spoke volumes. And I'm really glad to meet you actually, Max, right? Because the first thing that really struck me watching this was the very first sound we heard. Because we'd been sitting there just watching them still in silence for, it felt like minutes. And then all of a sudden, just an explosion of sound. Everything was overwhelming, uncomfortable. I could feel anxiety just sitting on top of me. And that's a really powerful thing. And I loved looking around the room, especially as you were walking around behind people and standing uncomfortably close. And I could see people sort of leaning forward just a little bit away because it was uncomfortable. It was really uncomfortable, and that was a really powerful thing. So yes, art can absolutely have an impact. It can have an impact, especially on awareness, because we need to be aware of a problem to have hope that we can fix it.
Maybe let's continue with you, Magnus.
Sure.
If you started, you can continue. Could you briefly explain, introduce your own connection to depression? And I know you've been working with youth and different centers and projects, so how is that working?
So I've been dealing with depression for, I don't remember how old I am right now, about 10 years. And for me it starts as a social problem. I skipped ahead in school and found myself being 14 years old around 16-year-olds, and everyone here has experienced being 14 years old, and I wasn't a very grown-up 14-year-old. So just imagine being 16 back in school again, and there's a 14-year-old kid sitting in the front row, and just to top it all off, he thinks he's really smart and he plays the accordion. So he's basically the coolest kid in school. But I just started having problems showing up to school because I realized that how do I put this? I realized that I didn't feel equipped to take on the social challenges involved. And it stayed like that for a very long time. For me, I fled into the computer. And that's a really common solution, I think, especially for young men these days. The computer provides us with a place of control. A place where I sit there and I'm behind the keyboard, and even if I'm online, even if I'm interacting with people that I have no control over, there's such a shield in front of me. I can always think and type. I can always just turn off the computer. I can always back away. I can't do that in a social situation. And eventually what helped me get back on a sort of path of normal social development was getting involved with a group of youth in similar situations. I was 17 at the time, and getting involved with people with similar experiences, learning that this was not a unique thing. This wasn't just me being, I don't know, autistic or something. I don't have any sort of, I don't have the word, diagnosis, thank you, with anything. I just know I feel miserable a lot of the time, and that's the core of what depression means to me. And meeting these people, discussing this with them, and challenging it on our own terms, not with any sort of guiding force telling us how to do it, which pills to take, how long to exercise each day, just working together and taking control and responsibility for our own recovery was what helped me change. Start changing, it's still a process. But I wound up taking part in a lot of activism, a lot of advocacy work. I took part in a Nordic Council of Ministers study, which was around youth mental health in the Nordic countries. I helped establish the Recovery College of Iceland, which is it's an organization which operates on very similar principles to the ones I listed before. That is to say, hope, control, and opportunity. And I still am finding new areas and new groups and new people to work with and talk with and learn from. Like here, right now, I had never imagined this connection of two worlds, contemporary dance and depression. But having seen it, I mean, at least I can imagine it now.
Can you maybe see what is the difference between depression in youth society and depression when you're an adult? Is there a different kind of way of reacting or seeing or coping with that? As you said, video games, I don't know, that probably goes in all of the age range, but while you're working with youth, maybe you can see it.
I have a lot of experience working with youth, but less so with older people. I think hope may be easier to find for young people. That's sort of been my experience, because you have so much time in front of you. Even when you're sometimes debating to cut that time short, you know that there is potential for that time to be used. And I know I know a lot of people whose depression is exacerbated by their age. So people who think, I'm 29 years old and I haven't finished like basic education. I'm 29 years old and I haven't achieved anything in this field that matters so much to me. I'm starting now when I feel like everyone around me is 10 years younger. Whereas when you're young, the problem is more, I think, in this inherent lack of security and control. And I think the core of what I'm trying to say is early intervention is really important, because I think a lot of these problems are easier to address for young people. Not easy, but easier to address.
And addressing the problem is Asha here with the Depression Treatment Center. You're the founder and the head of this center, and could you briefly as well explain how is that working directly with the people suffering from the depression?
What we are doing in our center is we are looking for the ways, non-medical ways, without drugs to help people with depression. We have a lot of psychologists, but also we're looking for ways to give education to people, lectures, other ways about how people can help themselves. Because at least in our country, you can easily get drugs to cure your depression, but as we know, drugs are very limited with efficacy. So there are a lot of people who maybe don't want to take drugs or they're not efficient, and then if they don't know that there are a lot of ways, there are a lot of specialists, they are really hopeless. They think that, okay, I tried everything and nothing works, so that's all. And we're looking for different ways, because depression is an illness when you don't have one treatment that works for everyone. That means that everybody have to look for different puzzles, what works for me. And there is nothing that works for everyone. It's a long way, and like you are saying that it's not over. It's like for all the life. It's about how we are treating ourselves. We might not be in depression, but nobody is safe. So it's all life journey.
Then I wanted to ask for all of you, what are the most common stereotypes and prejudice about depression? So basically, which are not true, but what do you hear most often about the depression?
I can start. From my clients, I hear, I think, all the time that I have to do everything by my own. That's why people come to seek for help after 5 years, 10 years, 7 years of suffering, because they think think that, like you said, that it's not illness, like just I am miserable. It's everything about me. I'm just bad, so yeah. Also, what we can hear, like in broader public, I think it's that depression is not illness; it's just laziness. So that's like already bad stereotypes. So.
Well, we've been discussing with Cynthia quite a few times this strange like duality, or even it's not easy to talk about depression precisely, because its attitude is very different in different societies and different countries, very, very, very different. And like this attitude that it's all your own fault, it's wrong, something's wrong with you, so do something about that, that's your fault, is sort of very depressing. And you sort of cannot then, it goes nowhere, sort of. But on the other hand, what I was telling Cynthia, it's right, which is really sort of sad, but it's true. It's a fault of a person who is depressed. But that doesn't mean that's it. That means a beginning of understanding that and starting working with that. And in some societies, there is more help from a side of a society, of giving a helping hand and putting those people as a part of a society, but not as someone who is outsider. Saying that really, okay, everyone is like that. And I think this is a great. I don't think it's not exactly a stereotype. I don't know what to say about stereotypes. I think that's the brightest stereotype of it's just do something about that. Don't bother me. which I'm saying is sort of right, but it's about the rest of societies that has to be, both parts have to be educated. A person who is depressed about a condition and the ways how to treat a condition and how to observe himself or herself and to go on, and the other part of a society which is like sort of reflecting or not reflecting this condition. And it can happen anytime with any person, and it is happening all the time with all of us in different degrees. Sometimes it's just over and we cannot go on with that. Okay.
What I wanted to add that the problem, I think the problem is that the society and the way the society works, at least in our context, in our country, I would say in Western context, that whenever you are out, you are out. And there's the gap between the society and the processes just stays bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's very hard for a person to get again. The person can, the friends are just refusing to meet because it's very hard to maintain a relationship. If every time there is a rejection, and the person with depression is rejecting, it's just too much, it's overwhelming. What you saw in the performance is just overwhelming state that it's so close and it's so all the time, that's very hard for others to deal with it. I wouldn't say it's stereotype, I would say that's a process which happening.
I really agree with that. That's a lot of what I wanted to touch on as well, because in Icelandic at least, the word we use for people who aren't working and are on welfare, the word we use basically translates to powerless. And that's really terrible, just because you have this term applied to you as a whole. It doesn't matter if you're not working because of depression. It doesn't matter if you're not working because you don't have a leg. It doesn't matter if you're not working because you're paralyzed. You are powerless. And it feels like you've been branded. And that is a stereotype. It is a stereotype because as a powerless person, you can't help yourself. You have no power. You have no control. Your life is in the state's hands, and not in a good way. Because suddenly, if I want to work as a powerless person, every cent I make is deducted from my welfare. So I'm encouraged not to work. So I'm encouraged to be powerless. So I'm encouraged to not better myself. That's a horrible stereotype, and it's one that I feel is enforced, and it's I think the worst moment I've ever witnessed, and it's not something that happened to me, is I was witness to a conversation my friend had with her doctor, her psychiatrist, and she had gone through a very difficult time, and had just come from the psych ward, basically. Had been there for several weeks in emergency care. And she had been on drugs for several months, and they were affecting her thyroid. And she decided that she didn't want to take these drugs anymore because they were making her feel physically bad. And she'd rather take the mental challenges over the physical ones. And I heard her speaking to her doctor, and she said, I want to quit these drugs. And he said, no. And she said, no, I want to quit these drugs. And he said, no. And she said, I'm going to quit these drugs. And he said, okay, I'm not going to help you with that. And that was the end of their conversation. And that's horrible to me, that a doctor, a person who's responsible for helping you be healthy, will leave you rather than let you make a decision he disagrees with, rather than help you live the best life you want to live. He will just walk away, wash his hands of that responsibility. Look, put it into context of someone in a what do you call them, life support, and the family decides they want to keep the life support going or cut off the life support. They want to make a decision, and the doctor just says, "Okay, but I'm not doing it for you," and he just walks away and makes them take care of it themselves. It's, yeah, that's a moment that's always sat with me because it just paints a really disturbing picture.
Yeah, before I continue, I wanted to ask if you have any comments or questions. Yes, you do. I'm going to give you the microphone because we're recording.
Hi, I wanted to ask you as a specialist, because you mentioned that your center specializes or deals or treats without drugs. So would you say that every every kind of depression and anxiety can be treated without drugs?
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
I'm just saying that when we have not so severe depressions, there are a lot of recommendations not to start with drugs, not to start with the most intensive care. You can start from psychological consultations, you can start from lifestyle changes, and that might help for a lot of people. Of course, it's different to do everything, especially when you are depressed. It's very difficult to do when you are healthy, but when you are depressed, it's a real challenge to make more physical activity, to look into your diet, into your sleep, and other things.
But that's for very light depression, right? And medium.
I wouldn't say that's for very light depression. All of us know what is very light depression. But when you have more serious depression, you can do that. But as I said earlier, there is no cure that can help everyone. Drugs can't help everyone, and other stuff also can't help for everyone.
I just feel on a like I would like to share on a personal note as well that I've gone through a pretty strong anxiety, and I was always the person I have problem taking drugs. Even if I have gastritis, I don't take drugs. Somehow I cannot take anything what is not mine, and I had a tendency to anxiety since I'm a kid, but I had it under control with meditation, sports, walks, and all of the other tools. But at a certain point of my life, due to circumstances, it went to the point where I, as a person who doesn't take drugs, I was crawling to a psychiatrist and saying, just give me something. And I think I was put in the situation because that was it. I just needed something, maybe for 5 days, you know. And then I had to review, and I think we have to have this flexibility or I was not flexible with the attitude towards drugs. I just wanted to avoid them in any case. I had a very negative attitude. But then it's important to stay flexible and to stay open in your individual case. And when it made click in my mind that if I have, I know it's a cliche saying, but it made click with this cliche saying, if I have diabetes, I also take drugs. And maybe in my specific case, drugs really helped me for a while. And with a combination, and maybe half a year and 1 year, I'm out, I'm fine, I have my tools, and I can go back to walks, right? And meditation. So it's always very individual.
Thank you for sharing. That's very important what you were saying, because I'm really not saying don't use drugs. I have a lot of clients who use drugs. I have clients for whom I say maybe it's time. And yes, there are people that could say like you are, I know, no, no, me and drugs, no, never, ever. But sometimes it could really help. Yes.
Any more?
I have only one question. I don't use the microphone because I'm actor and I have a real loud voice. Is this team you speak about depression? Is this speaking about the dance piece, or is this your own stories you told us? Because I don't see anything of this you say in the dance piece. And it's very interesting what you say, but I'm not in a self-feel something. I want to see a dance piece to show me what is depression, but I see nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Fair enough. What can I say? Fair enough. You can have your own perception. Mm. Maybe you saw some. Maybe you saw something else.
The oldest woman here, and I have experience of years. I never saw such a boring piece who tell me nothing, totally nothing. And it seems, you know the story, someone hang a white picture on the wall and say, you see not the story on the picture, you are crazy. I saw not the story. In Germany, there is a word, des Kaisers neue Kleider. I cannot translate, but this is the story what I see.
I would say that's a part of what you're supposed to see. Like, it's not seeing the story, not understanding the emotion of what's happening there, not connecting with it, is part of the emotion. That's part of the experience.
About your story, you want to speak about your story, and you too. But
Of course.
nobody have it in his body.
No.
You have to go to stage and show it, but not to speak about a lot of words and take four nice ladies. They don't know what they do.
Are you sure about that? Because it's almost impossible for us to say. Everyone has experienced something along these lines. And everyone also has experienced, forgive me, I do not mean to attack or be rude, but everyone also has experienced this response. I've experienced it from people in authority positions in my life, of just my emotions not being recognized for the expression, because the expression to them isn't right. And it's valuable to me actually to be able to respond to you, because I don't think you can say that this wasn't delivering the emotion that you're speaking of, because this is an intensely personal emotion.
Eyes, which is a very strange way to see a theater, let's say. And I leave most of performances in first few minutes. Very often, even performance. So I very often I don't go to performances of my friends because I don't feel comfortable living in few first minutes. So very, very few things are touching me. And it's very personal, and it's a I would explain it as some mysticism and some resonance and electromagnetics of a place and space in universe. So it's fine. We all are fine. Thank you very much.
I can say you from the actor side, it shows totally boring. When I do this, when I look to my partner, it's signs for boring.
Well, that's
You want only to speak about yourself.
that's great that we have different perspectives on the performance. Of course, that's all our rights, and I appreciate it. And of course, it can be boring. and it can be, I don't know, disgusting. It can be asking for rage, and it's totally normal. And the meaning of this discussion is basically to broaden both the artistic and the mental health, and like kind of combining them together, not talking only about depression, not talking only about the dance piece, but about this collaboration, and yeah, what can we say and what can we give into that? So there's another question.
I'm probably not quite as strong as what's just been said. That was. I actually maybe this to speak about the piece again. I had the experience that there was. Could you not flash because it will give me a migraine? I'm sorry. I'm trying to avoid it all the way through. There was a kind of line like as I watched the piece that it wasn't the same thing going round again and again. Actually, I didn't experience it as that, and I was trying to understand what I was seeing in terms of actually kind of shorter term process of development in it. And what I was seeing was a friction, which is very common in dance theatre, between kind of lived experience and symbolic gesture. And I felt like towards the end, the lived experience was a bit, started to come out a little bit more. It was more strongly the center of what I was seeing it. So I was drawn in more. And I kind of wanted that to be from the beginning. I felt like at the beginning there was a strong element of kind of representing something or pointing at something. And then towards the end I was getting more, this line was always there somehow, like falling between. And then I felt like I got moved, and consequently, as you say, you know, we all have various degrees of the experience of depression. Some a lot and some less. But it touched me there in a place which is had the potential for some change. But it was walking this line, and I got frustrated and maybe a little bit bored sometimes when I felt what was happening was I was having something pointed at rather than an invitation into an invitation to come with us here, because the very fact of the invitation is transformative. And when it remained symbolic gesture, it didn't have, it kind of was like a piece that was exactly that thing of pointing at somebody with depression and going, oh, you're other. When it was this, so it kept, for me, the piece kept falling between those two places. And then the music also a little bit, when it was more layered, it was not so symbolic gesture. So that was my experience. So it probably touches a little bit on the kind of the highly critical kind of experience, and also the experience of people feeling that their personal experience is spoken about by the piece. So maybe that crosses a bridge a little bit there between those two things.
Thank you.
I enjoyed being there, actually, which is a strange thing to say.
When I was watching the piece, I was just wondering, maybe for people who have knowledge about depression or have relatives or have gone through it, it's easier to decode and to relate. I don't know how because I've gone through it, so I know, like, I can see a lot in the piece, but I'm not sure how it is to see for someone who, you know, who doesn't know how it feels when you cannot get up out of the bed, who just doesn't know it, right? So I don't know. So this we should ask those people who are watching and they don't have this experience.
I listen to what you say and I feel the deep need to talk about something, but the way how you express yourself, also what you just said, maybe people who don't have the experience cannot get it. I mean, someone who is walking into a museum, if I look at artwork, I want to be touched in what way ever. I want to be touched, I want to have a resonance. So I don't need to read a dictionary before I enter a museum. Same is with dance. I want to go in there and I want to receive something. just mentioned, the Kaisers neue Kleider, is the pretending of inventing something new. And this is what I felt, with deep respect to your personal stories. This is one thing. But creating a piece of art is not, it starts from the personal story, but then we have to find ways how to communicate, because when I sit in the audience, I don't want to enter your story. I want you to touch me so that I can touch my own story. And this you did not achieve. I'm sorry that I have to say it. It was a nice approach, but you did not touch me. You did not get me in. At no point, I look around, and I'm almost 60 now, and I see there is a battery of technicians who do a little schwupp, schwupp, schwupp. I cannot imagine that you need all these technicians, that you need all this setup to send out a simple storyline, which doesn't have to be on the level of narration, to bring in the audience. And as everyone was sitting in the square, you could look around and you could see that people were kind of not even irritated. Irritation is a good thing, no? But people were bored because you didn't give us the point where I could, the point of reference, where I could touch, where I could stay for a moment. This you did not give me on the level of the choreography, on the level of the narration, on the level of the dramaturgy. I felt no dramaturgy at all. And then we have a little sound, and then we have a little in and out, and then in the end you bring, of course, there had to be this video screening. But on the level of dramaturgy, you left me completely alone. I'm sorry that I have to say this, and I think you should not be so arrogant to say, yeah, people who don't have the experience, they cannot follow. I think this is too simple. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's dynamic. It's dynamic after all the standing still of the evening. So, but I don't want to label everything as arrogance, yeah, it's the word that I choose. Yeah.
Maybe the technicians were visiting Latvian technicians from the project, and they were supervised also by Lithuanian technicians, because this is a Baltic dance platform. Maybe it's not what you think. I'm surprised also that you're trying to speak on behalf of all of us. No, you did. You said there was everywhere there was boredom in the room. I'm sorry, but you can speak about your own reaction. But you were speaking on behalf of a lot of other people. I heard you. Sorry, but...
I just said, from my perspective, what I saw, and I gave interpretation, but I'm not talking for anyone else, I'm just speaking for myself.
Okay. I'll speak for myself just to ask a question. I want to ask a question about the rhythmic decisions of the performance. I admit that I came to the performance and I did not read what I'm coming to see. So the theme of depression, I'm realizing thanks to this discussion. But during the performance, I was aware that we were dealing with heavy emotion and a lack of possibility to go in a new direction somehow. But now I'm beginning to realize some things, and I just wonder about the decisions about rhythm, because there were moments where we were left in the dark.
Okay, I'm trying to avoid this, but I'll be very honest with you. I was depressed for a couple of years, I think, in general. And when, with the help of the drugs, I got the 0 point when I again built my life. I looked at this period and I draw actually I made a story, and I draw a line. How was it for me? I draw a line. How was one period going? What's happening there? What's next? And basically, then later with Linda we worked, and this was the basic rhythm, like template for the piece. Very personal. I'm not like telling a lot of people this, and we stayed with that. We stayed with the real experience and the real rhythm of my experience. Of course, working together with Linda, and we didn't make superficial choices, because to get great and very like right piece, like the piece should be done. This is the rhythm, and we follow it. No, this was the rhythm of depression.
Are there any more comments or questions? I'm actually quite glad that this was really a discussion, because usually what we are experiencing, that the talks are usually talks and the people don't involve. So it's great to hear that, and I personally appreciate every thought, and I think there are a lot of thoughts we still need to think about on our own as well. So I would like to thank you all for this late night discussion. Thank you very much.